Hey, folks. So, what we decided to do is break up Laura's podcast into two parts because Paul and I wanted to interject a lot of things here or there, which you'll hear us come in and out of the podcast on a couple of occasions. If you haven't caught the last week's podcast, Laura Jones wrote the book Hunt or Be Hunted, and she really breaks down well building grit. I think it's something that a lot of us we talk about as a very valuable thing. We'll get going right into the podcast, part two.
And here's the thing, most leadership programs fail because they're just focused on you and another person or you and a couple of other people. But leadership is more than just interpersonal communication, right? It's about getting it done, reframing how you think, impacting others, and taking responsibility. And what does that spell? GRIT, grit. So leadership is grit. You can't be a leader without it.
So for folks who are trying to improve or develop their grits and improve their resilience, one common obstacle or hurdle that they might face is that they're surrounded by a social circle, whether it's friends or family, that may not always be supportive of growth ambitions, right? They might be
Mhm.
well-meaning, but we see oftentimes where this social circles, it's almost like an invisible leash, like keeping someone from growing. So do you
Yeah.
have any advice or suggestions for those people that are in this position and trying to cultivate their grit, but might not have the understanding of those closest to them?
Yes, absolutely, I do. In fact, when my son passed away, I had what's called secondary losses. Some strange things to me about it. And then others didn't say anything at all and really weren't supportive and therefore turned their backs and walked away. This is going to be the same here, right? We have to change our environment. We have to change who we're around. Now, I understand that some of those are going to be family, right? So for those listening, if they say, what if my parents aren't supportive? What if my siblings aren't supportive? What if my children aren't supportive? What if my aunts, my uncles, whoever it is that you have around you, if they are not supportive of you, then there's only one person you have to listen to. That's yourself, because the belief comes from within. I could teach you all the skills all day long with how to develop grit, but if you don't believe it yourself, if you don't believe that you can do that, then you're not going to apply it. Do you remember that process I spoke of earlier of the environment, followed by the belief, followed by the motivation? I've done hundreds and hundreds of hours of research on this, and I've got over 200 references in my book. And that's how I was able to develop this very bespoke process, this custom process that if you apply this in any situation, you will achieve success. But you do have to have a culture of excellence around you. So you have to evaluate, if I have people around me that are not supportive, how can I put myself in an environment where there are supportive individuals? But I found an incredible support group that helped me. I'm a huge advocate for our veterans. I'm married to a Marine. And also, I used to be married prior actually to US Air Force. And so therefore I've been around military for 20 something years. And I will tell you this, one of the groups, if you will, that I felt comfortable with. So the grief side, I found comfort in support, and that's either the support group that I mentioned with a group of parents who have lost children. But the other side of it is the trauma. And I felt like a lot of people didn't understand the trauma I went through with nearly losing my own life, which is a very real situation. And when you have to say goodbye to your husband or your spouse, and you know that the next people flash on that machine, you won't know about it because you'll be dead. That's pretty tough to accept. So that's in those moments, and that trauma can be triggered through various different things. I realized that who are the best people for me to be around? Who understands trauma? Veterans do. And I'm very used to being around veterans. And so I really wanted to throw myself back into that environment in a big way, but give back. So now I sit on the advisory board for a nonprofit called Warrior Rising, who help veterans transition from military to become entrepreneurs. I mentor them and help them in many ways. I keynote speak for them. But going back to the point of grit in instilling this in individuals and really understanding about having that culture around you, you've got to be responsible, right? You've got to take ownership. You've got to take responsibility of putting yourself in an environment of where you do have supportive individuals. I'm not saying don't ever be around those other people, but you can try to help them reframe it. And if they don't want to listen or they don't want to reframe it themselves, you can reframe what they're saying. So if you've got others around you that are saying, you know what, I don't think this is the best for you. I think you should be doing this, or I don't see how this is going to be helpful. Just remember how you communicate with them, right? You could agree with them and then reframe it. Because when you agree with somebody, now you're not being confrontational. So if you agree with them and then reframe it in a way that helps them understand and see it from a different perspective, that's where you can start to change the hearts and minds of others. However, that's not always possible. In my case, I have a supportive family, but there was a time after I'd moved over to the US that my family even said, "What are you doing, Lara? Like, you're going through such hard times. Come back over here. It'd be a lot easier. You could get a job. You could do all of this stuff." And I said, "No, absolutely not." And even in those moments when my own family was saying to me, "Come back. You really should. This is not working." I didn't give up. I never gave up that belief. So that's the one thing you got to hold on to, because you are going to have negativity around you. Remember, I said 80% of your thoughts are negative, 90% are repetitive. You've got to have that awareness that in those moments, in that time, when those people, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, and you're going to have secondary losses, by the way, when you start to apply this.
Taking a quick break from the podcast to talk a little bit more about navigating the social circle. One of the things that I want to just bring up is I call it the power of limiting associations. When you're going through transformations and you may not have the confidence and the ability to voice what you're trying to accomplish yourself, to teach and talk others into being your champion is hard when you're trying to get your damn self to do it. Sometimes people aren't going to be aligned, and for that, I some people just aren't really into financial freedom and saving money and investing. And I'm like, cool, man, that's the way we can hang out. We can do
Yeah.
some stuff together. We limit the associations. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say there's a guy out there, not going to say who it is in the real estate world, but he has this funny saying, "Oh, if you don't work out and you don't invest in real estate, I'm sorry, man, we're not gonna be friends." It's funny, but you have to know what to stay away from. And the other thing I picked up from Laura was she had people that she loved, friends, family, and they weren't exactly aligned. And
Yeah.
sometimes it can come from people that are in your corner, but not aligned with what your mindset is going. But any other kind of takeaways from that one, Paul? Or
Yeah, and that one resonates with me a lot too. I remember when I started my entrepreneurial journey, I was my first job out of residency was with a neurology group in Connecticut, and great colleagues, had a great relationship with them. But because of the changes that were going on in the whole healthcare industry, healthcare becoming corporatized and all these productivity mandates and whatnot, I knew that this was not my calling. This was not what I signed up for, right? And so I knew that I needed to, and I wanted very much to eventually set up my own practice. But at the time, I did not know anyone who had done this. It seemed like a crazy idea whenever I even brought up the possibility of this, because a lot of folks, they were like maybe further along in their careers, that they just had like a different mindset. But I also knew that it was so important to be in that mindset, to have voices in my head every day to be able to tell me that, you know what, this is possible. So I remember during my hour-long commutes every day, I would listen to, at the time, it was these books were still on CDs. Right? So I remember listening to books like Seven Habits from Stephen Covey, Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week, books by Napoleon Hill, like all the classics, right? Yeah. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. This was about 2011, 2012.
it's funny you said those years because those are pretty much the same years that I was able to find the Tony Robbins books on torrent and download that stuff for free. And I would listen to that stuff too. I was a little
Yeah.
ashamed of it, but it made me feel good at the time.
Yeah.
And that's funny. That's the same exact time, but
Ah, it's really
very,
interesting.
what we're in our like late 20s or late 30s, something like that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been in my early 30s. You
Yeah.
probably late 20s. It seems like we both had a similar situation where we didn't have that circle then. So we had to create our own circle in a way. And what was available, things like audiobooks. And I think at some level, it sounds like we both understood the power of mindset. You have to listen to this stuff and really take it in like, day after day after day. Because Lara's right. Like most of our thoughts, unfortunately, as human beings, they tend to be negative or repetitive unless you take control of your thoughts. And one negative thought does not equal one positive thought, unfortunately. You need at least 3, possibly 5 positive thoughts to just to offset one negative thought. And so think about how hard that is, right? And this is why it's so important to, if you're going after something, to you got to surround yourself with the circle and the people that will support you and give you that positive boost, right? Because you need to overcome that 3 or 5 to 1 ratio. Otherwise, your negative thoughts are just going to take over.
And then I think what you and I didn't have back then is like a lot of people, if you Google inspirational
Yeah.
5 to 15 minute YouTube videos, I think those are great lead ins into this world. We didn't really have that. We just luckily jumped into these audiobooks and the right
Yeah.
ones. But that's where I think there's a lot of people out there, at the time where I was working on the road by myself and there wasn't really any peers around. And there was just me and my headset listening. And I think people go through that. There are times in their life when they have that type of stuff. Um, and it's gonna you have to choose what to put in your ears and what you
Yeah.
take in. And at that time, I think you and I were eating our vegetables the right time.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It's we feed ourselves food, right? We can either feed ourselves junk food or wholesome food, and the same is with our minds, right? You can fill yourself with all the stuff that's out there, right? You can whether it's social media or all the pro sports. There's so much stuff that is out there designed to just keep us content and to get our attention, right? So you have to be intentional about what you feed your brain, right? What you read, what you take in.
All right, back to Laura's interview.
So that's something that you have to start to learn to accept if you do want to push yourself into having that culture of excellence and you find yourself you're not in that right now. But when you have those negative thoughts or feelings thrown at you, you've got to remain true to who you are and you've got to have that belief inside of you. So sometimes I find it helpful to have positive words, maybe printed out and up. And even little quotes. Things like one of my quotes is every setback is a setup for a comeback. And I came up with that quite a while ago. And I thought, you know what? That's so true, though. Every time we fall down, even if somebody else said, I told you, I certainly knew that was going to happen, you just get back up and you prove them wrong. But here's the thing I don't want people to just get up and prove other people wrong. Do it to prove it to yourself because that's what's going to keep the belief. That's what's going to keep you going.
I love the story of having little messages everywhere. That's something that I do in my office, right? Little post-it notes
Yeah.
with affirmations or just listening to an audiobook in the
Yep.
car with positive messages. But yeah, I remember there was a time in my earlier life where I felt like I wasn't surrounded by many people with that growth, positive mindset. And I surrounded myself with positive messages by putting in books on tape, listening to
Yep.
podcasts, just finding a way to stay true to who you are. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I love that.
In fact, that's one of the reasons why when I created my YouTube channel, I started creating these little inspirational videos because I realized there's going to be other people out there that maybe they really do want to become the hunter, as I talk
Mhm.
about, hunt or be hunted, and they want to get to that next level, but they maybe don't have that culture of excellence around
Yeah.
them. So I started creating these little inspirational videos for them to just be able to see every day because that's what you need sometimes. You just need to hear it from somebody else that maybe isn't necessarily close to you or around you or you get a coach. And that's something I do every day with clients because they need that. They need to have that accountability. They need to have that support. And here's the thing, and I really want the listeners to understand this, that there's going to be people out there like you are. The reason the book is called Hunt or Be Hunted is because you are either the hunter or you are being hunted. And if there's people around you that said, I'm neither, no, they're being hunted then because you're one or the other.
Mhm.
Think of it 10,000 years ago. What did we have to do to survive? Adversity back then was I'm going to get eaten by a lion, right? I'm going to it's a survival instinct. And so fast forward all these years later, it's not really that much different, except the landscape changed, right? So now we're looking at the business landscape. And if you are not the hunter every single day, then you are being hunted. But here's what many people don't understand that to be the hunter, it is much like the lion. You don't have to be the fastest. You don't
Mhm.
have to be the loudest. You don't have to be the strongest but you do have to have the belief and you do have to have the courage and you do have to have the discipline to push past the uncomfortable and to do the hard things when it matters most. And the hunted. If I can do it when I've gone through severe trauma, and I also went through trauma when I was over in the UK. I actually haven't mentioned it on here, but I talk about it a little in the book, right? It's in chapter 2. I talk about that. But if I can do that and I can come to a brand new country with nothing and build what I have today from nothing, purely based on one thing, grit. I had the grit to do everything that I needed to do. I had the discipline as well, and I had the belief. But the discipline and belief come into grit. That is part of grit with my son passing and my nearly losing my life. And there's many people that struggle to ever come back from that, but you can. And those that haven't gone through something like that, maybe there's some other type of adversity in your life. And if they're listening today and they're saying, gosh, I've just gone through this really tough time and I don't see a way out. There is a way out. Because let me tell you, if you can innovate your way out of a challenge, it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity. And that's what I want you to see it as. That's what I want everybody listening to see that as, because you're going to consistently have challenges thrown at you. We have change every single day. We have to face that change, but it's how you approach it. You can feel what you want to feel to that particular problem. That's okay. Be aware of that. Acknowledge those feelings. Now you get to choose how you react to those feelings. So how are you going to react? Right? Remember, that's the logical part of the brain and the emotional part that I talked about earlier. It's the same thing. So we have to make sure that we are always in control and we can reframe how we think about a situation. Remember, I said grit isn't about running away from the situation. It's about changing your perspective in the midst of the situation.
We have control over our own mindset. Wanted to switch back over to the kids, right? I think some of the takeaways I jotted down from what you said earlier was that you have, whether they play sports or not, there's something that they did that builds the confidence in there. But any kind of takeaways on instilling this in somebody else like that?
Yes, absolutely. So if we're referring to children as an example, if we're trying to help our children instill more grit, they actually have to see it from you first. So you have to be able to do it first for them to be able to see it, because seeing is believing, right? They see you doing it, they are much more likely to copy. Let me give you an example.
Oh, I don't
So
want
I
them to
told you,
see things I'm doing. I might fail. I'm
but
saying
that's
that.
good. That's
Okay.
good. Lane, that's good. If they see you fail, now they get to see how you choose to react to failure. Now they can see, okay, how does my dad react to that specific problem or issue or challenge? That's exactly what you want your kids to see. I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect. My kids see me fail at things. But what I do is I pick myself back up. I'll give you a prime example. And I actually do talk about this in the book, but it's about 18 months ago. I tried out for something called SOS, which is Suffer on a Saturday. And it was really for the elites within that specific community in the fitness world that I was training in to be a part of. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try really hard and I'm going to train every day and I'm going to get into that class. The first time I took it, it was a very rigorous fitness test and you had to do it within under 10 minutes. And I could go through exactly what you had to do. I did talk about it in the book, but it was intense. You have to run 25 calories. This is for women. Men can do it too, but it's different weights. But you run for 25 calories, you have to do 25 box jumps, 20 thrusters with heavy weights in your hand, 25 pounds each. You had to do 15 hang cleans, 15 deadlifts, 5 pull-ups. You got to push sleds back and forth for 50 or 60 meters or something like that. With 4 big plates on. I think for guys it was 5. So you're talking close to 300 pounds or whatever that is. And then finish off doing 25 calories on a bike. That's a lot of work that you have to do in a very short space of time. And you have to do that under 10 minutes. The first time I took it, I failed. And I actually did it in 12 minutes or something because I failed at the pull-ups. Now I'm a pro at the pull-ups, but at the time I wasn't, right? I could do strict pull-ups, but I wasn't able to do what we call kipping, right? So it's a faster movement and you use your hips to get you up. I could not do it. And, I failed, I should say. My kids saw this too, by the way. It took me about an hour to pick myself back up again. I phoned up one of my coaches and I said, Marcus, I need some help. I need you to help me with my pull-ups because that's what failed me in this test. And so I got to work immediately. It was like the very next day. I just got to work. And so I could choose to feel sorry for myself in that moment, but I didn't. I just picked up the phone and said, okay, what's the solution? So I knew that there was an answer. So in response to what you were saying, like my kids saw that. They saw me fail at something, but now they've seen me how I respond to it. And so that is incredible resilience and grit to teach a child or children that it's okay to fail because you are going to fail. If you teach your kids that you're never going to fail, you're doing them a disjustice because the moment they get out there into the real world, it's going to hit them hard. And so we're better off to prepare them for the grit. So let's get them to choose their grit, right? We can help them along their way. We can get them to do hard things because when they fail, that's when the learning happens, right? It's where the magic happens. That's where we get an opportunity to rewire how we think. We can rewire our brain. And so as children, it is imperative that they see you as parents fail, but they also see how you react to it. And I want them to see you react in a very positive manner and show them that you can do it. Then 12 weeks later, I think it was 12 weeks and 6 days to be exact, I then passed the test, and I didn't just pass it, I did it in 9 minutes and 6 seconds. So I was nearly a minute under what the pass time was. And that was just in 12 weeks of applying my grit and showing how from failure I can have success. I failed so many times when I came to this country, right? I couldn't eat for 3 days because I didn't have the money. I was a choice between a roof over my head or food on the table. I chose a roof over my head because I knew I couldn't survive without food, but I couldn't survive being on the streets as a woman on my own in a foreign country. So we have to make those tough decisions sometimes. And you've got to remember any decisions you do make, they have a consequence and you can impact the very people around you, including your children. So you can have the opportunity to influence in a powerful, positive way or in a negative way. So it works both ways. You want them to see how you're reacting to a situation, and then you can encourage them with the grit that they should choose. And if they are unsure, you can help guide them. That's what really your role as a parent is. You're guiding them in this thing called life and showing them that what can be possible, even when there's failure. And it does happen. So let's not teach them that we live in a perfect world and we're never going to have failure. You want them to understand and experience failure. The younger they experience it, the more resilient, the more grit they're going to develop over time. And when they become adults, they're going to be higher performers as a result and be much more gritty individuals.
I think there's definitely something to be said about modeling the behavior. Like actions speak louder than words. And especially as parents, we have such an outsized role in what they pick up, and they pick up so much more than what we realize. So I love what you spoke about that. And just thinking about school and whatnot, I think this is another reason why things like sports or extracurricular activities, anything outside of the traditional dogma of get good grades, or get the best grades you can get, and that's your path to success. I think anything outside of that helps to develop grit, right? Because things like sports, you're gonna fail, right? You're
Mhm.
gonna fail at some point. You're probably gonna fail most of the time, right? You're always gonna get beat by somebody faster or somebody older. So I think there's so much to learn from that.
Absolutely. In
Yeah.
fact, I think that grit should be, and this is something that I really advocate for, but it could be used as an admissions tool. Remember, I said about talent may start the race, but grit's going to finish it. There is a study out there that 54% of individuals that finish a task have more grit, right? They're much more likely to finish if they have that instilled in them because they've learned it. It's something that they've continued to practice over and over. And it's like a muscle. And I think that grit should be part of what children learn so it better prepares them when they do face the real world and they have to make decisions on their own and they have to decide, is this going to be, how is this thought serving me? And the reason I feel so passionate about this is because unfortunately there's social media out there and that
Yeah.
can be a great powerful tool for us as entrepreneurs, as businesses, in getting the message out there, but it can also impact in a very negative way if the message that is sent out there is the wrong message. If we have grit in us and our children have grit, they will learn how they can reframe how they think about something and not just follow it. And that's very important because I have seen firsthand with friends over in the UK. Unfortunately, I've got a friend whose niece took her own life and she was a child. It just saddens me beyond belief that this can happen. And I think that we can have ways to help prevent it if our children from young ages understood more about grit and understood about getting it done, reframing how you think,
Yeah.
impacting others and taking responsibility. Those four core elements that I identified as part of grit really can not just help you as a performer and help you in that performance levels in terms of achieving that higher success, but it can help change your life and it can help save a life.
And I think we just scratched the surface here. If you guys want to read more, you guys can buy the book Hunt or Be Hunted. I'll display the screenshot on the screen now. But yeah, Laura Jones, you can find on Amazon. And then thanks for coming on, Laura. Shout out to you. The whole reason why we did this podcast, I think what got you over the hump is like you wanted to show your kids you weren't just
Yeah.
sitting at home doing nothing. You wanted them to see. That's why we record these things late in the evenings.
Yeah, but one day they'll be able to see this, right? They'll be able to see the evolution
Yeah.
process, and all this is going to be for them to listen to and watch, right?
So if you guys want to help, you guys can leave a review on iTunes or Google Play and say "Well, it's getting better, but give the 5 stars to me so it ranks well. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Laura.
And I just wanted to actually say, I do have something I want to give away to your listeners. If they really enjoyed this episode and really enjoyed listening to my talking about grit, I actually developed a mini grit assessment, which is different from the grit type indicator. A mini grit assessment is available in the book. So if you buy the book, you can scan a QR code and you can take the assessment. But what I actually really want to give away to the listeners today is if they just text the word grit, if they are in the US, it doesn't work outside of the US, but if you text the word grit to 33777, you will get an email. You can download a free grit accountability guide that just gives a brief overview of the grit system that I mentioned, the global grit system. And you can use that to benefit yourself in any situation or utilize it to help others, right? So it's just something I love to give away to listeners for taking the time to listen to this. And you can also learn more at larajones.com. It's LARA. So it's larajones.com. And you can learn a little bit more about me and get in touch with me that way. And as well, you can follow me on LinkedIn and reach out to me that way.
Thanks so much, Lara. I think you spoke so many pearls of wisdom, and I think a lot of this is going to resonate with a lot of our listeners.
And yeah, it's been fantastic, guys. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
All right, pretty good podcast, Sample. Not bad for one of our first guests here. If people have any other suggestions or other context, let us know if they want to get somebody else on here. But how are you feeling after?
I thought she was great. I think she has a lot of just really practical and relevant for a lot of our listeners. So I think this topic of grit and how we can foster more grit, those that we lead or those that we parent, I think it's really relevant.
Yeah, some of the takeaways that I had overall, I think we have all these buzzwords of grit that we talk about. It'd be nice if somebody created like a deck of cards to, hey, try this as a parent or try this yourself when this happens, that you instill it. Because unfortunately, with her story, it started off with a tragedy. A lot of
Mm,
times you're not forced to do anything or take that stoic path unless something junk is happening to you.
yeah.
That it'd be nice if there was some type of program out there where when things are going swell, how can you build a little grit on the side? But maybe people read her book. There's some takeaways there.
It really comes down to what is the meaning that we give to these stories, right? And you can either take a tragedy, right, take a hardship, and use that to really as a source of blame. Right? You can use that to go into like a victimhood mentality, right? Or you can use it as the stepping stone, right? You can turn your pain into purpose, right? And I think when that happens, then that can be a superpower.
Yeah, the people who write these books or achieve great things, they're people definitely who've gone through some turmoil. Have you ever heard of the parable? It's like a Chinese parable of the guy who, the Chinese farmer, where the saying is like, could be good, could be bad. Have you ever heard of this one?
Yeah, I love that story.
Can you tell it? If not, I'm gonna find it off the internet here and read it for the folks.
Man, I think
Actually, what we'll do for you guys next week, prepare the story of the old farmer and the horse. If you haven't heard it before, I think everyone's got to hear the story. So that's the teaser for next week's podcast. But until then, please share the show and give Paul the 5-star review so he can show his kids that he's doing something.